we tell stories, there's a unique kind of human connection that happens that doesn't happen with slides or data or PowerPoint or bullet points. Stories uniquely create a human connection that's really powerful. And we can bring that human connection into more parts of the work that we're doing. And so that's what I do with science and technology leaders all around the world, is how do we access this more human language and connect it strategically to the outcomes that we care about.
Welcome to Leadership Disrupted. Today, we're joined by author David Hutchens, who's also the CEO at Mythos Global. Mythos Global and David help innovation leaders around the world exercise their storytelling skills, helping them build their stories, understand their stories, and then tell their stories more fully to whoever their audience is. With nearly 30 years of experience in organizational learning, David's an expert in using narrative to facilitate engagement, alignment, learning, and change in the world's most influential organizations. Most importantly, as I've read through David's material, a couple of his books, David manages to bring life to almost anything that someone is trying to message. And so I'm excited. I think that in a world of disrupted leadership, in a world where we are overwhelmed by information, we're cognitively stressed out by just too much information, too much data, and most of us are trying to break through. How do I break my story through everything that's swimming around us? Ultimately, I think David has a great approach to breaking through by clarifying, developing, and then delivering a really good story, whatever story it is that you're trying to tell. So with that, let me welcome David Hutchens. David, welcome. I know my intro is a bit brief. I know you've worked with a lot of influential organizations. Just part of the list I have here is Accenture, IBM, Google, PayPal, Cisco, FedEx, L'Oreal, Paris, NASA, et cetera, et cetera. So you're in this and you're living this space every day. What part of your story would you like to tell us as an introduction?
So, well, that was already a fantastic introduction, because you're exactly right that when leaders bring forward this language that is narrative, when we tell stories, it's really a simple idea that something different happens. That when we tell stories, there's a unique kind of human connection that happens that doesn't happen with slides or data or PowerPoint or bullet points. Stories uniquely create a human connection that's really powerful. And we can bring that human connection into more parts of the work that we're doing. And so that's what I do with science and technology leaders all around the world, is how do we access this more human language and connect it strategically to the outcomes that we care about.
And when I talk to leaders about this disrupted world that we're trying to lead in now, I'm amazed at the number of times the conversation, it might start with technology. It might start with generational shifts. It may start with cultural shifts. It may start with the complexity of business or the speed of business. It may start in a lot of different places. And oftentimes it leads to humanness, where ultimately they're saying, I'm trying to figure out a way to be a more human leader, to be a deeper leader, to be a better leader. And I think mastering the art of knowing and then telling your story has got to be a big part of that.
I keep hearing this language around the humanization of the organization and a more humanized leadership. And I do think this is one of the gifts of the AI age, it's inviting us into this different experience of leadership. And you're right, Dan, I think story is not the only path into this more humanized leadership, but I think it might be the fastest path. I think it might be the most accessible path, because story is a language that already lives in all of our brains. It's your operating system for making sense of the world. So this skill it's not about being a better public speaker. It's not about performing. It's taking this operating system for sense making that lives in your brain and being more intentional about connecting it to the work that we care about.
Well, let's back up then. How did you get into this?
That question comes up a lot, actually, because it's true. This is a sweet gig. I get to fly to Paris and help leaders at L'Oreal tell innovation stories. It's a lot of fun. So people say, "Hey, how'd you get into this?" So you're going to find that I think in terms of story taxonomies, different types of stories. And there's one story that as leaders, all of your listeners should be thinking about. I call it the why I'm here story. Or I also call it a leader with conviction. And that's what you're asking for right now, Dan, is, hey, Dave, how did you get into this? So I've got a lot of stories to answer that. Let me give you one, just to give an example of what this can sound like. And as your listeners are listening, I hope that they will start reflecting and going, what's my version of that story? So how did I get into this? Back in the early 2000s, when I was still a young guy and new in the organizational learning and organizational communication space, I was living in Atlanta. I live in Nashville, Tennessee now, but I was living in Atlanta at the time, working as a communications freelancer. And one organization that I wanted to work with was the Coca-Cola Company, headquartered, of course, there in Atlanta. And so finally, one day, through a series of introductions and contacts and networks, I got invited in. Hey, Dave, we hear that you do communications work. We have a challenge. Maybe you can help us with this. So I put on my blazer, which I never wear, and I drove to the Coca-Cola headquarters. So here's the challenge that they presented to me. So back in the early 2000s, Coca-Cola was early in this journey to become what was known as a learning organization. And if you remember Peter Senge and The Fifth Discipline, it was a bestseller in the 90s and early 2000s. And so they'd committed the entire system to this transformation effort. Mm-hmm. And they said, early in our work, we've run into a challenge. And the challenge is nobody understands what we're talking about when we say we want to be a learning organization. And, you know, if you've read The Fifth Discipline, it can be kind of dense and theoretical, right? Mm-hmm. And so they said, can you create a communication solution to help people understand what it means to be a learning organization? And I lied and said, oh, of course I can do that. And I went home and I panicked. The first thing I did was I drove to the bookstore and bought the book, Fifth Discipline, and I read it. And I thought, oh, man.
Well, and it is, I have the paper, I have the Fifth Discipline field book. I still remember a big, thick orange book. And you're right. It's intimidating.
I mean, geeks like us love that stuff, but not everybody does, right? And so I thought, I am so fired from Coke. This is my first break, and I'm already fired. And so I didn't know what else to do. I created a blank document on my computer. I wrote the words, out of not knowing what else to do. Once upon a time, there was a wolf. And I wrote a story about a flock of sheep that outwits a pack of hungry wolves. And in the process, they display the capabilities of a learning organization. And I had a buddy who was a children's book illustrator who lived in Texas. I called Bobby and I said, hey, you need to draw some crazy pictures for me. And I dropped these cartoon illustrations into this snarky, kind of Saturday Night Live humor manuscript. And I titled it Outlearning the Wolves. And I brought this to the Coca-Cola Company, and I thought, I'm definitely fired. This is so weird and so snarky. And what happened was I didn't get fired. A publisher ended up picking up this manuscript and said, hey, we think we can do something with this. And today, Outlearning the Wolves is the name of the book, and it's still selling 25, 30 years later. It's in a dozen languages and 500,000 copies. And it has invited a conversation all around the world about what it means to be a learning culture. And it really caught me by surprise because it's not like I was smart and knew this was going to work. I didn't have any other ideas. And that was the moment that said, what is it about this approach that I thought was going to get me fired that is instead engaging people in cultures all around the world. And that was really the moment that I said, you know what? I think I'm going to pay attention to this. I think there's something in that story phenomenon. And that was 25, 30 years ago. And it's been so fun that I've stayed with it. So when you ask, how did I get into this work? That's one of my why I'm here stories.
That is incredible. And what I love about that, one of the things is that every one of your books is innately its own story. And so I was saying this to you previously, that as I went to Amazon, and I think you've published, is it 14 books now?
No, I'm at 9.
9. Okay, nine books now. Every one of them, because of the title and the illustration, there's a story to the book itself. And so I found myself wanting to download each of them onto my Kindle. And then at a certain point, I'm realizing, okay, I don't have the reading capacity to do all of this, but that also speaks to the power of story. Like, we get just drawn in, we get pulled into someone's story. And yet, I think in today's hyper productivity focused world, maybe a lot of us humans, we don't think about our own story, and we don't tell our own story. When you say the why I'm here story, I think perhaps a lot of leaders and employees in general don't take the time to think through that question. Why am I here? What is my story? And then how do I express that story to others? Can you maybe get a little practical and walk us through that process or that approach?
The approach of how do we discover and develop these stories?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I do with teams. And one of the resources that I use, and I'm showing on video, you can't see it if you're only listening to audio. One of the cool resources I use is this. It's called the Leadership Story Deck. I'm holding up a box that's a deck of cards that's dozens of ideas of stories you could be selecting and connecting to the work that you're doing right now. And where this came from is a lot of people who do story work will jump right to, how do you tell a good story, right? Oh, you need emotion content. Oh, you need a beginning, middle, end. Yeah, all that's true. What I find when I work with teams is, even before we get to there, everybody says, I don't know what stories to tell. I can't think of any stories. Everybody says that. And so that's a big part of the question that I work with teams to answer, because it's not that you don't have stories. It's your brain is made of stories. Your brain is a story machine. When you go to sleep tonight, your brain's going to keep telling you stories because it can't stop. So the deck of cards is to help you identify stories you have that you didn't know you had. So actually, the first card in the deck is called the Why I'm Here story. It's such a flexible story that, it's not just how did you get into this industry. It's, you know what, this new project we're bringing forward, there's this new innovation. There's a reason I care about this. There's something that connects me to this. And now we're not just seeing the innovation. Now we're seeing you and your belief. And that belief is socially transferable. There's a contagion to it. When we see why you believe, we believe as well. So that's the first card in the deck. There's dozens of cards that we can connect to innovation work, to change and strategy and transformation work, to sales, to identity and culture and belonging. There's even stories you should be telling about yourself as you build your own leadership brand, as you navigate the organization. So all of those are in the story deck, and we do a process called story mining, where we go through the deck and we start identifying the value holding narrative assets, these stories that hold value. And we start identifying the assets that we already have that we could be connecting to the work that we care about.
So if I'm, this is my way of kind of checking if I'm tracking with you. Like, when you first used that phrase, why I'm here, I thought I understood it, but the way I understood it was why I'm here, like my personal story, or in typical leadership language, my personal brand. But what I also got from you is why I'm here, why I'm choosing to be here, why I'm on this project, why I care about this service, why I'm engaging with this client or this team, why I'm here can be also a why I'm here story. So And when you say narrative assets, if I think back to, bits and pieces of my life and certain stories that reflect something about me, if someone really wanted to know, when was I pushed to the limit, when they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, how close have I been pushed? That might be a story, that might be a narrative asset, if it does in fact reflect something about me. Is that what you mean by a narrative asset?
That is what I mean. That's just a term I use broadly to say some stories hold unique value because they say something important about you, or they say something important about the work that we're bringing forward. And so we want to find these value holding stories. And you're exactly right. There's dozens of story types in the deck. We're talking specifically right now about the Why I'm Here story. And you're right, it's really scalable. It can be why I'm in this industry, why leadership development, or why this organization. Or every time you get a promotion, you have a new Why I'm Here story. There's a reason I wanted to step into this role. Every time there's a new job or a new project, there's a new Why I'm Here story. So that's why it's the first card in the deck. It's really flexible. We can connect it to lots of work that we're doing.
I'm assuming, and I'm only asking because I really want to know now. I know how to get your books. How do I get your deck?
It's on Amazon.
Is it? Okay. All right. I'll search for it then.
The Leadership Story Deck, it's on Amazon.com. All my international friends say, ooh, how do I get it shipped to the UK or Canada? You have to dial into the US Amazon site and have it shipped internationally. But you can get it in the UK and across Europe.
Perfect. And not that we intended this to be like a Ron Popeil pocket fisherman commercial.
Right.
And
yet about selling.
It's natural. I mean, there is a sort of natural thing that happens. And so I hate to be selfish, but part of what was going through my head was, as we were talking, I was thinking, I need to refine further the story of why I'm here on this podcast, the Leadership Disrupted podcast. It exists for a very specific intent. And I know instinctively in my head what that reason is, but I don't know that I've really developed that full story in terms of helping explain what I've seen in the world, what I see happening with leadership, how those challenges impact me and the people around me, and what I'm hoping to do with this. So, and in any event, thank you. I mean, already I'm beginning to apply this mentally.
Beautiful, and I hope your listeners are doing the same. And that step one is identifying. Ooh, I can remember a moment like that. And then step two is developing the story. And for that, I've got a framework called the story canvas. I don't have it in front of me right now, but it's a big visual where after you identify the story, I think I should tell people about that Coca-Cola job that I did, where I wrote that crazy story. How do I tell that? Well, I pull out the story canvas and visually build it. And that's available for free. You can go to my website and download it for free.
Okay.
It's in lots of different languages. And so in your case, what brings you to this podcast? On the story canvas, it would start with, there's a box at the very beginning that says, so there I was, right? So to get into the story language, start with a time or place marker. And I already did this. Back in the early 2000s, I was living in Atlanta. Ooh, your brain likes this. Ooh, this sounds like a story. Oh my gosh, I wonder what happened next, right? So there are certain elements that I put in there to create this powerful connection that we're looking for. And none of these are new ideas. Story structure, I mean, Aristotle was talking about this in 4th century BC. He was cracking the code, right? These are all old ideas that we're now bringing back into the knowledge era organization.
So David, so there I was working with a leader, and he was under extreme stress. He was having a bad day. And this goes back a couple of years ago. And he said to me, I've been leading people for almost 4 decades, and I've never been so stressed out. And it's not any one thing. I can't quite put my finger on it. And then he began to list all of his stressors. And some of them were technology, and some of them were generational, and some of them were a conflict of values and cultures, and some was just the speed and complexity of the business. And he just went on and on and on. And there was a moment where I was getting overwhelmed by his overwhelm. And that was the moment when my mind said, there's something here. There's something different here, because he thinks his story is just his own, but it's not, because I've heard a version of this story from lots of other people. And I would say that's the moment where I started thinking, okay, what is this that's happening differently? And what can I do about that thing that's happening differently? So I imagine that would be if I was following your board, that would be recognizing that and then building out where that goes. Am I tracking with you?
Man, Dan, you got it. That's it.
Yeah, I'm a good student. I am.
Yeah, man, you did it. And what I love is, again, I tell people, this isn't presentation skills. It's not performance. It's just you talking about things that happened. I tell people, don't change your voice to try to perform. That's just you talking about what happened. And you put that emotion content in there. That's one of the things a lot of leaders miss. I was talking to this client and he was overwhelmed. And as I was listening to him, I felt overwhelmed. Well, as you shared that, Dan, all of us know what that emotion feels like. When you say the word overwhelm, somewhere in our bodies listening, we summon up that feeling and we actually feel it. Now we're not just in our brains. Now we're in our emotions going, yeah, I know what that feels like. And now we're starting to see a little bit more about who you are, Dan, and what you care about. And now we're connected to the work because you are the embodiment of the work.
So how does your work differ from, I'm going to call it classic storytelling that's oftentimes delivered by a marketing department or an HR department, where storytelling as sales tool. And I know that you're not saying it can't be a sales tool. It is a sales tool, but there's there's sort of your grandfather's storytelling approach, and yours feels different, feels more relevant. Do you hear that from people? And can you, I guess, unpack that? Like what's different?
Yeah, it's highly strategic and it's focused on outcomes. The reason we're telling stories is not because it's fun or feels good. I mean, I think it is fun and I think it does feel good, but the reason we're doing it is there's something that we're moving through the organization. And so we start with these outcomes. And I'll tell you that the outcomes I work with most often with teams, it can be change and transformation. So that's senior level. We're moving a change through the system. People don't like it. They don't trust it. They're tired, they're scared, they're mad, they're resisting, they like the way things are. There are all these emotional currents in the system that prevent the change from moving forward. We need a language that will be a lever for those emotion currents, and story is the language that does that. So change and transformation, it can be sense making and knowledge work. What does the organization know? And that application actually looks a little bit different. Instead of me telling a story to you, we're sitting in a circle telling stories to each other and doing some sense making and drawing some actionable wisdom out of the stories that we tell each other. It can be sales or marketplace voice. When I work with big tech consulting, those guys are really bad about going into RFPs, a $250 million contract, and they bring these slide decks that have 70 slides in them. And their markets are saying, please stop doing that. Deloitte's in here selling on Monday and Accenture's on Tuesday and McKinsey's on Wednesday. And you all sound kind of the same. Your innovations aren't that different. Make us believe in you. Who are you? And Accenture doesn't know how to have that conversation. What does that mean? Make you believe. Yeah. So I'm helping them tell stories to say, there's something we care about around here that makes us a little different. So it can be market engagement as well.
Well, and so one of the ahas just in having this conversation for me is, I've always thought that the solution to cognitive overload, because it's true. I mean, everybody's inundated with marketing media, news media, social media, commercial media. It's just overwhelming us. I've thought that, well, then the key to communication and breaking through is efficiency, making your stories shorter or making your communication shorter, getting to the point faster, which has its place. But what I hear from you is, okay, yeah, you can certainly do that. But here's a way to get deeper information and more information through in a way that's not cognitively overwhelming, because our minds react to stories very differently than other kinds of information that's flowing at us.
I mean, you and your partner will spend all day Saturday binge watching Netflix. You can go for 5 hours because it feels good.
Yeah.
And you're right. In this world of noise, we need a technology that punches through the noise. You know, in this world where attention is the new rare resource, the precious resource, story is the language that punches through that noise and grabs attention. And not only does it grab attention, it moves people to action.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we define what is that action, what is that outcome, and then we work backwards. What are the stories we can tell that will get us to that outcome that we're looking for? People don't remember what they think. They remember what they feel. People don't act on what they think. They act on what they feel, and then we use our rationality to justify after the fact what we've already decided in our emotions. And so the role of the leader is to connect ideas to emotions. If you care about moving the idea through the system, we need to connect the idea to emotions strategically and then tell that story.
Do you have any examples of that? And I mean, you've mentioned some of your clients, but do you have any examples of stories and the process that help them arrive at that, sort of to help us put some meat on the bones, so to speak, and fill that framework out mentally?
So how about a transformation story, a change story?
Sure.
So one of the really smart thinkers in this space that's organizational narrative is a guy named Stephen Denning. He's an author and was formerly an executive at World Bank. And once again, in the early 2000s and late 1990s, Steve Denning got a vision for a new capability that was emerging at the time known as knowledge management. And now, of course, it's a robust field. But early in the days of knowledge management, Steve Denning said, we need this at World Bank. And so Steve said he went around the world to different World Bank offices with his presentation of why we need this new capability. And he said, he told me people found the idea strange and incomprehensible. And he was getting frustrated because he was going around the world and not getting any traction making his presentation. And he said one day he stepped up in front of a group, and for the first time he changed his message. And instead of starting with his slide, he started with a story. And here's the story he told. He said, in June of last year, there was a small healthcare clinic in the town of Zambia in Africa. And this healthcare clinic needed information about a new strain of malaria. And so with their dial-up modem, which was a new technology at the time, they were able to dial into the Centers for Disease Control, also a pretty new organization at the time. And they were able to download protocols for this new treatment of malaria. And Steve said to his audience, what's significant about this story is that our team at World Bank isn't in it. Despite our know-how on all kinds of poverty-related issues around the world, we don't have that capability of spreading that knowledge. Imagine if we did. Think what an organization we could become. And that's the story that he started with. And then he went on with his presentation like he normally did. And he said for the first time, after his presentation was done, instead of everybody politely filing out of the auditorium and going, great meeting, instead people circled around him. They came to the stage and they said, why don't we have this capability? What's the holdup? Like they're pointing at him like it's his fault, right? What's the holdup? Why don't we have this? And Steve said, oh my God, what just happened here? The only thing he did different was the Zambia story. And so he tried it again at the next office. He started with the Zambia story and he got the same response. Today, World Bank is a global leader in the knowledge management movement. Steve Denning says the Zambia story is what made it possible.
Wow.
And so for leaders, this almost sounds too good to be true, right? That's a short little 60-second story. And at World Bank, it sparked massive systemic transformation. All I have to do is tell a story and I can get transformation like that. I mean, it's not a dog whistle. There's some intentionality that goes into it.
Right.
But yeah, I've seen it happen. The language is that powerful. It can unstick a stuck system.
Well, and in that story, most of the people in that audience already knew the facts. They knew the data. They knew they had the information, but pulling the information into that story gives it so much more of a powerful impact, and I think makes it real for people. That makes perfect sense.
I think there is an emotion moment in that story. The part where he says, "We're not in it." There's almost like a FOMO in there.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we should be in there, right? Now we've moved out of our brains. I pay attention to myself, somatic awareness. When I'm listening to people speak, I can sense when I'm up in my brain. I'm going, okay, yeah, that's a good point. No, I disagree with that point. No, I wonder where the data come from. And then when we get that emotion moment, you can almost feel the energy move down into your body. It makes you go, that's what we want. Wow. So we need that emotion moment to unstick the system and move people forward. And story gets you there really easily.
So let's assume for a moment, most of the people listening, they're sold on the concept, they're sold on the value. They want to do this. They want to follow this path. The easy answer is go to Amazon, download the story deck, download, one of your books. And I should, I'm going to just share one of the images of this book, Story Dash. This is your most recent book.
Right.
And I just based on what you're sharing, obviously this book captures a lot of these key thoughts. But what are the common, I hate to use the word mistakes, but I guess that's the word that first comes to mind. As people are first trying this, I mean, we all crawl before we walk before we run. So when people are first crawling, what are some of the challenges that they have trying to bring this to life?
So I can do a whole hour on mistakes that people make. I would say the first one is winging it. And most people who are listening to this are going, yeah, this makes sense. Oh, I'm on board with this. Hey, I can do this. I already think in stories, which is true, you do. But I do this for a living. And if I just wing it and say, ooh, when I'm in front of my client, I'm going to try to tell a story. I'm usually not happy with how it goes. And so the whole idea of Story Dash is when the stakes are high, when failure is not an option, build this into the process. You've got the project plan for the new innovation you're bringing forward. Build in the piece where, as a team, we identify and develop the narrative assets that are going to create engagement in the thing. Don't wing it. You're not going to be happy. And so, my work is leadership development. I build this as a skill, not individually. This is a team skill where now we're telling stories and the rest of the team is invited to be interpretive community. And we're making sense of the stories together and we're developing them together and bringing them forward together and supporting each other in this work. So the idea of Story Dash is it's a repeatable process for when we're bringing the new thing forward. Start with the cards, identify the stories you need. We need a why I'm here story, followed by an imagine a world story, followed by a moments of impact story, right? We sequence these stories and then we practice telling them. And in that process, everybody goes, oh my God, that felt really different from what we normally do around here. And now we have these developed story assets ready to bring forward. So that's the work that I do with teams.
I had a situation years ago where I was interviewing a candidate for a position, and there were lots of strong candidates, but the one that really jumped out, she told stories. They weren't long, but they weren't short either. They were more than anecdotes, but less than a novella. But they were good stories. But every one of them, now that you're saying it this way, as I think back, every one of them had its point, had something that it was designed to reveal about her and show about her. So by the time she wasn't just listing her accomplishments, she was telling me the story of her accomplishments, the story of her own journey, and we ended up hiring her, and it was a great hire, great situation, but she genuinely jumped out from the pack. Now that I'm thinking about it, when she started telling those stories, she brought herself to life in a way that the others were perfectly fine. The information they shared was perfectly fine, but it didn't come to life the way it did with her.
Right. Yeah. If a candidate says, "Oh, I optimized the project and accelerated implementation and saved $10,000," okay, that sounds okay. But if a candidate says, "Let me tell you about a time I blew it, and here's how I recovered. Oh man, this was one of the worst moments." We're leaning in differently now.
Yeah.
We experience that different. And so on the story canvas framework that I told you about, it's all these, you fill in the boxes to build the story. The last box on the framework is called, "And now we know." There's a reason I told you this story. And this is what differentiates leadership narrative from entertainment storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Is, we're telling stories not to entertain people, we're telling stories to align. And so at the end of the story, the leader says, "I think this story says something." And then you have to use your language to say what that is, right? I told the Wolves Coca-Cola story, and belief is socially transferable. And you should be telling this story, right? I made a strategic statement at the end of that story to invite our audience to start doing some sense making on their own. So this invitation is critical. In fact, I even tell leaders, let's define that first and then build the story towards it.
So I think the fact that to this day, I can remember one of her stories, what that says to me, the lady that I was speaking to you about before, what that says to me is somehow this gets through into my neurons, and it sticks, and it's retained in a way that other information isn't retained.
How many years ago was that, Dan?
This was easily 15 years ago. It was a
long time. You remember
time.
the story 15
well,
years
what
later?
what I remember, because you said, "And now we know," when you use that phrase, "And now we know," and then you get to so what this story ultimately means. I remember that she didn't use that phrase, but she said, "What I learned about myself in that process was I love a juicy problem. I love a problem that no one else wants to solve or others are afraid of." Because the one story that she told that I remember is because I asked her to describe a difficult project, and she said, well, probably the most difficult was the project nobody wanted to own. And the reason I got it, honestly, it was because nobody else wanted it. It was under-resourced, it was ill-defined, she listed all the challenges with the project. Nobody wanted to touch this. And she actually got some guidance saying, do not attach yourself to this sinking ship. So that's how she started. And of course, that grabbed me. And then she described the details in a fairly normal way. But then she said, and what I learned about myself was, I loved that. I loved the fact that I'm the person who wants to run into the burning building. I'm the person who sees a train running down the tracks, and I want to stop the train from crashing. And she said, so I'm not looking for a job where you put me on tasks that anybody could do, or I'm looking for the things that people are afraid of. And I couldn't in that moment really think of, well, what are the projects that nobody really wants? But I knew that that's what I wanted. I wanted that mindset. And it resonates with me to this day. And it actually became something where I thought, I want to be that person. I also want to be the person who runs into the burning building, not just sits by in the crowd saying, "Oh my God, there's a fire." And so that started in my head from that particular story.
So I'm speaking directly to your audience now. Audience, listen to what Dan is saying. He is repeating a story from 15 years ago. Think about how amazing this is. Because when we talk about reasons to bring the narrative skill forward, this is one of them. People talk about the sticky aspect of stories. There's data with your PowerPoint presentation. We know how much of that people will remember 1 hour after your presentation. A lot of studies say 7%. Depends on what it is, right? And that's 1 hour afterwards. The next day, we might be down to a single idea or maybe nothing. So bullet points evaporate from your brain really fast. A story, if it's a good one, it might stick in your body forever.
Yeah.
So what are the messages we want to make sure move through your system? Let's take those messages and intentionally put them inside real human stories with emotion content that will stick in the body and inspire people to action. 15 years later, they might be remembering your story. And the other thing you said, Dan, oh man, we can unpack what you just said for a long time, because the other thing you said was, in that story, I saw something about myself. It made me realize I want to be that kind of person. The neuroscience, Dan, says that when we listen to stories, if the story is good, if it works on us, there's a phenomenon called neural coupling. Literally, they can put the storyteller and the audience in 2 MRIs and scan their brains at the same time. We see that their brains light up in a pattern that are nearly identical to each other. There's even a whole TED talk of Dr. Yuri Hassan from Princeton. He shows the brain waves align in real time once there's story language. And so at some level, as you were listening to the candidate tell the story about juicy problems, your brain was connected to her brain. You were experiencing what she was describing. And now her story is really a story about you. We find ourselves in this story, right? Neural coupling is really powerful.
And so let me ask you what might be a challenging question. I know there was a point in human development going back thousands of years when we were very naturally storytellers. I mean, I don't know that all humans sat around campfires and told each other stories, but in general, that agrarian lifestyle, that nomadic lifestyle, we think of that in many ways as a storytelling culture because they didn't have a written language, they told their language through stories. The language learning carried forward through stories. So if we were built to be a storytelling species, at our very core, how did that get lost? Because I do think, as I hear you talking, one of the challenges that leaders have in not being deeply connected to their employees is the lack of this. I'm not saying the lack of stories, but the lack of the thinking that leads to the stories, the lack of the connection that leads to the stories. If you don't know yourself well enough, if you don't know that you are a bundle of stories, then you don't tell those stories. You don't share those stories. Instead, what you do is let's get together, let's have a meeting, and let's review KPIs. Let's review OKRs. Let's look at our strategy. Let's review a strategy. And then how are we doing on the strategy? Let's work on our execution plan. And then we wonder, why does it all feel so, it's busy and it's important, but it feels a little like refined carbohydrates, kind of empty. So how do we lose that?
How did we lose that? Oh my goodness.
I'm asking you to summarize all of human development in 10 minutes.
I've seen people connect it to Newtonian thinking and the mechanistic view of organizational systems and the birth of management science, where we would put human behavior into algorithms, and if you pay the seamstress 2 cents more an hour, she should produce 3 more units per hour, right? And so, and that led to this idea that as leaders, that we lead with our rationality, that we step into the organization and we set our humanity aside There's almost a belief that all the human stuff gets in the way. Emotion is messy. Stories are subjective. Data is real. So we push all of that out. And now we're in this great reversal, because now the age of AI is coming in, and the robots are taking over more and more of what we used to do. And it's almost creating this almost existential question. What are people even for?
I'll tell you,
And
AI, it's creating so much anxiety for some people, for many people, and yet it's a set of powerful tools, potentially powerful tools, and yet if you fall into the trap of saying, well, anytime I find myself thinking hard, let me go to AI for an easier answer. So if I'm thinking hard about my wedding vows, well, let me see what AI tells me to do. And would you really go into your wedding repeating AI-driven wedding vows? Well, some do. And so I think there's this danger that AI, we use it not as a tool, but as a crutch. And then we become less
right.
human.
I think there's a danger of that too. So for those of in your audience who are watching the video, I'm showing an image. This is what it looks like often when I work with teams. So that I'm showing an image of my clients. This is at L'Oreal, the beauty and makeup company. This is in Paris. And it's an image of 4 people sitting in a circle telling stories to each other. And what stands out to you, Dan? What do you see?
The eye connection, the leaning in.
Leaning in.
Yeah.
Yeah, we use that language, leaning in, to talk about people who are engaged. You literally see their bodies, their postures leaning in. What's not in this picture?
Well, there's no PowerPoint. What else is not in this picture?
No phones.
Okay. No. Oh, yes. No smartphones. Right.
Pure human engagement. This is, I even tell people, push away from the tables and set your chairs in a circle so that your knees are almost touching. We're looking at each other. We're encountering each other in our full humanity, and inviting back this old language. And in leaders who say, I suck at storytelling, I don't know how to do this, that's demonstrably false, because we all do this.
Yeah.
When you go out for drinks with friends, nobody has to tell you to tell stories at the table. You default to this language. And so they're surprised how quickly they're able to access this narrative language. That's the first surprise. The second surprise is just the power of it. After they sit in that circle and they tell stories to each other, they go, oh my gosh, I've been working with this guy for 7 years. I feel like I know you after 6 minutes of storytelling. I know more about you than I did in 7 years of working with you. How is that possible? But people say that, right? It's the neural coupling. I sense who you are now, and this language gets us there.
So I'm imagining the most powerful stories. Well, I'm not imagining. Of course, I know this. It's obvious. The most powerful stories tend to reveal vulnerabilities, tend to reveal things we've learned from our mistakes, from our challenging times. And yet leaders are often uncomfortable with vulnerability. They're often uncomfortable saying, look, I wasn't the smartest guy in the room in this scenario or situation, or I made this mistake. And I think this is getting to, because I've worked with a couple of marketing teams that have done storytelling, and it ends up being kind of story bragging. It's, we're going to tell a story, and the story is a very, it's almost like poorly written movie dialogue. And poorly written movie dialogue, basically, everyone says exactly what they're thinking. And great dialogue tells a story, and no one says what they're thinking, but you get what they're thinking. You see it, you feel it through the story. But that's so. How do you help anybody, leaders in particular, become more comfortable sharing their vulnerabilities through storytelling?
Yeah, one thing I hear a lot is, I don't want to sound like a bragging jerk. And what I say to leaders is, the way around that is, don't tell us what you accomplished. Tell us what you learned.
Yeah.
Don't focus on what you accomplished. Okay. Focus on what you learned. If I told the Coca-Cola story as, hey, I wrote a bestseller because I'm just that good, you would have thought I was a jerk, but that's not how I tell the story. I fell into it by accident. I was a doofus who thought I was going to get fired, and then it ended up working. And I was like, oh my God, what just happened here? Why did it work? I don't know what the audience's response was. I'm guessing you don't think I'm a jerk. I'm guessing that you're thinking, oh man, I know how that feels. Yeah, I've felt kind of insecure like that before as well. And that is something that I do with leaders is let's practice this more vulnerable voice. And some leaders don't want to do that because I get paid the big bucks to have the right answer. But what those leaders find is they don't lose credibility when they tell stories like this, that people trust them more, not less, when you tell stories like that.
So somewhat closely related to discomfort with vulnerability is comfort with non-truths. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of the story actually being real as opposed to, creating a story and then someone goes, wait a minute, that sounds like The Equalizer with Denzel Washington, and that's an extreme. I'm just saying, I imagine it's critical that the story is actually true. Something, even if you're a great storyteller, something comes through when someone's not being authentic. But that's my opinion. But what are your thoughts on the importance of the story being authentic?
This is a question that comes up surprisingly often in today's world. I wonder why.
Yes.
Does the story need to be true? And so we can go deep into the nature of truth and mythos, representational truth, and logos, literal truth. But the short answer is don't make crap up. Because if you get called out, the cost is pretty high. And the way I think about authenticity and truth in storytelling, there's two stories, there's two narratives. There's the espoused narrative and then the experienced narrative. And the espoused narrative is the story that I'm telling with my words. I tell the Coca-Cola story. I tell Steve Denning's World Bank story. As I'm talking, you and your audience are checking me out and you're going, who is this guy? What's this guy's deal? And is what I'm experiencing aligning with what he's saying? And the more your experienced story lines up with the espoused story, the more you're likely to say, yeah, that dude seems pretty authentic to me. The greater the distance between espoused and experienced, the response is anger or even rage. If I feel like you're manipulating me and telling me a story that doesn't match my experience of the world, I'm going, what are you trying to do here? And that's American political discourse right now, right? So
there was a time, I'm going to go back 40 years, when if a president, and I don't mean to offend anybody with this example, I'm sorry, but if a president was found to have told an untruth, that would have been a big news story. There would have been President X said Y, and it turned out that the truth was Z. People would have been thunderstruck by that. There was an assumption that if the president of the United States says this, that is accurate. But we're so far beyond that now. And it's not just a Republican thing. It's not just a Democratic thing. I do think it's a politician thing. It is just, I don't know all of the root causes, but I think it's hurting us societally, where we are seeing global leadership where we have to start with cynicism. I have to start by paying close attention because I hear lies more often than truths. But then I think that then becomes part of the power of an authentic voice, an authentic story. And if you can sense that authenticity, but how do you help people sell their authentic stories? And maybe that's the wrong question. I guess, how do you help people make sure that their authentic story resonates with audiences? Because sometimes you feel like the authentic story isn't as neat. It's not as tidy. It's a little messy, and it may not exactly lead where I want it to lead. messy truth versus sanitized stories. I don't know. Does that prompt any thoughts from you?
Yeah, it does. And it goes back to the intentionality piece and not winging it. And that because stories are so powerful for engaging and moving the system forward, they demand and energy from us that we consider them in advance. And every time I have if I'm going into a new client meeting, or I'm about to I'm trying to sell to a new client, and I think, I'm talking to a pharmaceutical company. I should tell them about the work I did with Novartis a couple of years ago. Before the meeting, I'll actually go sit down with my wife and say, all right, here's a new story I haven't told before. Here's how I'm going to tell it. And I tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, you kind of lost me in the middle. I didn't understand something. I don't know. That didn't sound like you. What if you said it like this? I mean, it takes that kind of work. Before I was in organizational learning, I was a copywriter at big advertising agencies. And so I would spend days working on a single headline, a single story, a single image. There'd be hundreds of sticky notes all over the wall because the language is that sensitive and it demands that kind of attention. And again, if we believe in the work that we're bringing forward and want the engagement, we're willing to put that effort into it. It really deserves it.
I think forcing yourself to be authentic sometimes forces you to think through the things that are currently uncomfortable or messy. And if you think through them, in most cases, maybe not every case, but in most cases, the story becomes more powerful because of the messiness. It becomes more powerful because it's not perfect. I work with an organization that helps people who've been incarcerated rethink their story and retell their story because they're about to go into job interviews where they can't avoid the fact that they've been incarcerated. So there's a story there and they know they're going to have to tell that story, and finding the way into and out of that story is one of the keys to getting employment in a new environment, because people make assumptions. Your story must be a bad one. Your story must be something. But this has given me a lot of thought in terms of how to help them think through their story more deeply and more authentically, and not just tell it to get a job,
right?
But actually tell it to yourself while you're telling it to them, because it's true. It's true that you are not that thing that you did 8 years ago. You are not that thing that happened 10 years ago. You're not trying to water it down. You're not trying to dismiss it, but you're saying that's not you. What is you is what you learned from the entire series of events. Something like that.
Man, Dan, we need a whole other hour for this conversation. Because here in Nashville, I work with an organization that helps women come out of sex trafficking and addiction. And so the former streetwalkers, and now they're running, it's called Thistle Farms. Look up the website. It's a beautiful organization. Now they're running a $12 million organization where they produce and sell bath and home and body products. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing you just described, the sweet little, Baptist ladies book clubs say, hey, could you come to my church and tell us what it's like to be a prostitute? And they all go, no, that's not my only story. And so they're telling different stories. Let me tell you, when I came into this organization, I'd never touched a computer, and I was so intimidated by Microsoft Excel. And now I'm the Excel expert in the organization, and that's how I discovered my leadership. And so, there's actually a TED Talk called the Danger of a Single Story. None of us is the worst thing that ever happened to us. We have so many more stories, and by telling them, we open up our identities.
I'm writing that down. The danger of a single story. That resonates with me.
It's a powerful phrase, yeah.
And this often happens where we get to about the hour mark and we're about to wrap up, and now it's just getting interesting. And not that it hasn't been interesting; it's been interesting. but it's like now we're getting to some of the deep
I can
stuff.
go all day on this
And
stuff.
I can imagine that this
It's
whole
fun. It's
exercise
a
of
fun conversation. Yeah.
and thinking through your story isn't just for them. It's also for you. It's because the story you tell them is ultimately the story you're telling yourself as well, as long as it's authentic. And that can have a huge impact on particularly young people. One of the things I'm hearing a lot with the younger generations in the workforce is the stories they tell themselves about their employers and about themselves are not necessarily the most energizing, motivating stories. They have a lot of limiting stories that they tell, and so they struggle because they don't want to interview. They don't want to quit their current job because that means interviewing for a new job, and they don't want to interview for new jobs because that was the most painful experience of their life, because trying to tell their story to a stranger was just horribly painful. When in fact, you would hope that being given an opportunity to talk about yourself and tell your story or stories to a new person, whether or not they give you a job, whether or not they hire you, but the opportunity to share that part of yourself, you would hope that that would actually be a good thing. But for many of them, it's not. So we don't have time to go down that rabbit hole. But any final
That's our
thoughts?
third conversation together.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, exactly. And in fact, I'm making notes to myself because I'm going to reach out to the group that I mentioned, and I think there's something there, and I may end up. Well, I think there's something there, so we'll see.
So to the point you just made, I will say in the work I do with groups, there's a place for negative stories and failure stories, but I think there's real power in the positive, us at our best stories. There's a whole body of organizational development theory called appreciative inquiry that focuses on those positive stories of us at our best, because when you tell them, now instead of being in a problem-solving, problem-correcting mode, now the role of leadership is, ooh, that's what it looks like when we're crushing it. My job as a leader is to amplify those strengths. And it feels really good. And those Gen Z leaders come in. If you say, tell me about a time when you felt most engaged or alive or happiest in doing this work, and then you give space for those stories, you're going to have a very different kind of conversation and unleash an enormous amount of human energy that can move the work forward. Absolutely. Any other final thoughts that you want to share with us, David, as we wrap up? Because this has been great. I really do appreciate this, and I instinctively know this will be the first of many conversations that we have going forward. To your audience, I would say kind of start where you did, Dan. You know, I shared a why I'm here story, and my prompt to your audience members is, why are you here in this work, this industry, this role, or maybe this project? So I identify the scope. Why are you here? Bring us into a moment where you began to realize this is who you are or what you need to be doing. And then tell us that story. So I'll leave your audience with that. Huge conversation. Thank you so much, David. We'll talk again soon. Bye now. Thanks, Dan.